What January would be complete without a topic addressing the extra weight we all seem to have? But this isn't exercise, it's not a diet, it definitely isn't an expensive medication. Welcome to the Just Dumb Enough podcast, a show that acknowledges no one is always an expert by dispelling misconceptions with real experts. I'm your host as always, Colton Petrie. My guest today is Dr. Chet Stringham. Chet has been in practice for almost 3 decades now, and he came across a discovery that both makes sense and challenges general practices: that obesity is largely caused by stress. Don't lose hope. I know stress can seem impossible to get rid of, but it is possible to reverse that. And none of us are in this alone. 70% of Americans are overweight. Not obese, but overweight. And that's a really high number because it means that only 1 in 4 is maybe healthy. And the data he shares can be pretty extreme in some cases, like this.
But you know what's interesting is when you look at the curve at the number of public shootings, of mass shootings in the United States, it follows the exact same signature. You would have no way to know that you're not looking at obesity because those two graphs look identical. Isn't that interesting?
Let's lose stress and weight. Welcome to the show, Dr. Chet Stringham.
Thank you, Colton. It's very nice to be here, and I'm looking forward to sharing some great information with you and your audience. I think we're going to have a really fun time this evening.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fantastic. I'm very excited to have you on the show. Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit for those that don't know you?
Well, I'm Chet Stringham, and I'm a general internist in a small town in northern Nevada. And I've been in practice for about 28 years. And I've had approximately 250,000 visits with patients over the years. It's an extraordinary number. And I've learned a tremendous amount about obesity and various other things during my career. I've specialized in a number of different areas of interest within my practice, and I think it's just been absolutely fantastic to see patients lose weight as a result of things that are relatively unconventional, especially with what we're doing these days with GLP-1 agonists.
And that's, it's become a very hot topic. It's always something one way or the other where it's like, here's the new fad diet, or here's the new exercise that'll shred weight, or, all these number of things. And now, of course, introducing medications into the mix. Was there anything that really got you invested in learning more about this?
Yes, I think that obesity is just the ultimate mystery. On the surface level, it's incredibly easy to conceive of what's happening and what the actual problem is. But then when we do the things that actually make sense to help us lose weight, they just don't work. And they consistently don't seem to work for anybody. And so there are ways that we can address the problem that are not really the same as the ones that we typically tend to use, but they're highly effective. And that's what I think.
Yeah, I think a lot of people really stress about it because they're like, I'm eating the things they told me to eat. I'm working out the way they told me to work out, and I'm still not seeing weight loss, or I'm seeing weight loss very temporarily, and then it's picking right back up. So if it's not diet and it's not exercise, what is it that you've kind of brought forward?
Our culture is changing in some really interesting ways. And even over the last 20 years, some of these changes have accelerated. But essentially, it's my theory that about the year 1980, our culture started to change in some very momentous ways. And those ways have gone on to change the way we act, they change the way we eat, and they're changing a lot of other ways about the way that we interact with other people and various other things. And those are some of the root causes of obesity, rather than the diet and the exercise things that most of us are used to thinking about.
Yeah, so it's much more environmental or societal?
It's actually both. I think that it's in our culture, especially, it's considered a really good thing to take responsibility for our shortcomings, to own up to what our problems are, and to just take charge, to say, yes, this is something that I messed up, and I'm willing to make some changes and to really go after this problem. But the reality is that's part of the problem. The other part of the problem is the way that everybody's interacting with each other and has been over the last 40 years or so really is the source of the problem rather than the diet and exercise stuff.
So when you say the way we're interacting with each other, in that we have a much broader form of interaction and that we can talk to people all the time and we're receiving a lot of news, or in like a societal shift to be like much crueler or much more judgmental.
Well, consider this. I mean, if you drive down the freeway, you'll probably notice that people are behaving differently these days. If you walk into a grocery store and pick up some items, you probably notice that a lot of the people who you interact with are not behaving the way they would have maybe 5, 10, 15 years ago. And it's not just COVID, it's a lot of other things that are happening too. But and there are various theories that I have in terms of why this is happening, but it's really the interactions that we're having with other people and the ways that those interactions are leaving us feeling.
Okay. Could you tell me more about that?
Absolutely. I think that the first is, for example, that we've become incredibly enamored of efficiency. In our culture, really, when you look at where our priorities are right now, it is in making every single process more efficient than it ever has been in the past. Every item, every person, every job, every task, everything has to be done with greater efficiency than ever has been the case in the past. And that started sometime around 1980. It was largely a response to international competition here in the United States and having to streamline in order to remain competitive. But that was really the leading edge of a lot of the things that we're seeing. We started to become prioritizing of efficiency. And we started to, by definition, to kind of get away from some of the things that are kind of nice. So, for example, being kind to other people, really contemplating other people's needs and what their interests are. And in a highly efficient culture, a lot of that stuff tends to go by the wayside.
And I see that because, we're talking about all the metrics people are measured on today, where they're like,
Mhm.
you're 4% below your goal. And that could suddenly introduce a lot of stress to people, and you don't think about that as just being like a byproduct of us being efficient. We're just like, oh, that's work. All work
Mhm.
must be stressful because my work is stressful.
Mhm. It's very
So,
much the case, and I think that really, when you look at the ways that our interactions with other people have changed over the years, for example, somebody may ordinarily be fairly kind, but you put them into a situation where their resources are shortchanged. They don't have enough time. They probably don't have enough money. They probably don't have a lot of other things that they feel that they work for and that are rightfully theirs, and and it really changes the way that we behave. We become much more concerned about ourselves as a matter of self-preservation. And I think that goes on not only to cause obesity, but it also causes a lot of other issues. It causes violence in our culture. It causes those people with the worst of the coping skills to just kind of decompensate and not be able to handle ourselves with other people very well. And it's cold and it's a mess. It really is.
yeah, it certainly is. And, you're talking about broad societal problems and health issues. I mean, it really like between the obesity and the stress, this is a major killer in our society.
It really is. And I think that to me, I have always, especially in my medical practice, I've always concentrated on the things that each of us can do for ourselves to make our own world better and the world around those people who we know, who we enjoy in our lives. And I think that it would be great to write a book that would help everybody out. But my book is really just about helping the reader. And it's a way to navigate through a particularly complicated culture and where priorities are not really what they should be. They're not very healthy. It's funny that we talk about sustainability all the time. Sustainability, you literally cannot have a conversation in our culture for more than 15 minutes without the term sustainability coming up. But our own human environment is one of the most unsustainable things imaginable. At the very same time, we're making our natural environment more sustainable and talking about sustainability of wood and building materials and various other things. Everything has to be sustainable. But ironically, our own environment, the environment in which human beings live, is very unsustainable at this point.
Yeah, it almost sounds like being on an airline and they're like, put your mask on before others. And we're like, well, let's take care of things out here and then we'll take care of ourselves. We'll get back to this. We'll circle back.
Mhm. I love it. That is a wonderful. Every single time, even before that concept would sometimes come up in conversations, that the ironies involved in putting on your own oxygen mask first. I remember even 20 years ago sitting on a commercial airliner and just thinking, wow, that's almost poetic now, isn't it?
It certainly is. So, in talking about your book now, how do we go about, fixing these problems? Because it sounds like in order to address our own, obesity and stress problems,
Mhm.
we've got to address some pretty large issues.
We really do. And on the one hand, they're complicated issues and they're very deep issues. But on the other hand, once we identify these things, we can stop trying to address things that merely make sense and things that theoretically should work, except that they don't. So it's a way to it's a way to take the pylons out from around the parked telephone truck, and instead of having pylons around a parked truck, to only put them around things that are truly hazardous, and to focus attention where it should be rather than on every single thing in our environment. It's about focused, attention paid to certain things that really will yield results.
Certainly. So if you were to give everyone a mission, if they looked in your book or if you talked to them on the street, what is your primary mission where you're like, go do this thing today, now?
There absolutely is. I think the first is that a lot of us have work related stress, family related stress, unreasonable expectations, things of that sort. Just to be able to look at how reasonable expectations are. Is it reasonable as a physician that I work for 80 hours a week? I don't think so. And when I do that, I tend to gain weight. And that's ironic, given what I do for a living, that even I will gain weight working 80 hours a week. It's a high level of deprivation. And it's very, very firmly associated with obesity. So I find, for example, with myself, if I just do less, concentrate on things that are truly important and areas where my life is nourished and the lives of those people I care about are nourished also, I don't eat the way I do when I'm working 80 hours a week.
Certainly, it's an interesting thought to think, when you had said, like, oh, it's our jobs or these very stressful things and the amount of pressure we put on ourselves. I thought, could we do this in an isolated experiment where we're like, okay, none of you have to work and we've funded all your necessities? Would you see people lose weight just as a byproduct of now having free time for their own enjoyment?
I think you'd see people lose weight if people were one thing, if they were content, if not even so much that they had this intense sense of happiness, but that they're content in their lives. Their lives don't push them to eat excess food, and their lives don't cause a situation where our time is so spoken for that we don't exercise. If I have 20 minutes to myself every day, I'm sure not going to spend that time exercising. But it's more than that, because it's not just a matter of time. There's a very common misconception that we're too busy to exercise, but that's not really what it is. We only have the ability to care about so many things. We only have the ability to engage in so many things. And when we get super saturated by things that we really don't care about, but we just have to do them, this incredible, intense sense of urgency with absolutely everything. And most people just shrug their shoulders and say, to be honest, I really don't care.
And I've heard people, reference this in a couple way. I've heard some really silly ones where it's like marbles or spoons or, whatever it might be. But this is really kind of a budget problem where you're like, look, my mental capacity has $20 to spend today. And every time you ask me to do something, I have to spend $1.
Hmm?
And when I get to the end of the day, like exercising also costs $1 and I'm out of money.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of us just we're so super saturated by things that just really don't matter, and I think that's a big part of it. If I'm forced to care about things that I really don't care about in my own life. They're not important to me. And it just keeps happening because of one of the other issues that I talk about is how vigorously we're regulated in our culture. It has a really negative net effect on us, and it causes us to do things we ordinarily wouldn't do.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a lot of overstructuring. I think,
Mhm.
we've come into like there is a down to the second kind of grind mindset where people are like, your break starts exactly at this moment, it ends exactly at this moment, and if you're not working up
Mhm.
to the start of that and right at the end of that, like you're out of efficiency, right? Like you're going to be punished for having a moment of space to breathe.
No, that's absolutely correct. I mean, in my own personal life, I love flying airplanes, and aerobatic flying is my very favorite form. So I had considered a number of years ago becoming an aerobatic flight instructor to teach people to do loops and rolls and things like that. And what a blast that is! I love to show people how to do that now, but it means interacting with yet a whole new set of regulations. And I just decided consciously, I don't want to do that. I really don't want to be responsible for yet more controlled behavior and performing to yet more regulations. I just decided against that.
So how do we, for the average person out there that is stuck, maybe in an entry level job or in a very stable position where things are so heavily regulated, how do they take some of that control back to, try and unwind this situation?
It's all a matter of limited exposure to be able to look at this, like my decision to not be a flight instructor. Or other people may decide that they really don't want to be involved with certain organizations because there's a tremendous amount of regulation that's inherent in that. Or doing things that just are probably not worth it in terms of the numbers of regulations you have to put up with and what it brings to your own life. I think a lot of us can make a conscious decision to just limit our exposure to those types of things. So part of it is taking an inventory of what types of, I mean, with respect to regulation, there are other hallmarks of weight gain and various other things, but to just be able to take a an inventory of where your regulations are occurring. So, are you a general contractor? Probably have to put up with a fair number of regulations just to do that. It may not be a great idea to get involved doing other things that would involve yet more regulations. So, and or to make the connection between the regulations that the vigorous external regulations that we put up with, and to just say, I'm making a conscious decision to not do those things based on the fact that I don't want to tolerate that. I've associated with those regulations with increased weight, and it's not worth it to me.
So kind of cutting out some of the nonsense, as it were.
Mm-hmm. It is. I
Interesting.
mean, and making sure that the things that you do are things that truly bring you pleasure in a quantity that's commensurate to what you're having to do in order to do that. How much time you're having to spend, and how many other things you're having to tolerate in order to just put up with this. Yeah, it's critical.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, it's like having a very regulated career, but then outside of that, practicing music, because you're like, music is
Mhm.
entirely whatever you're making of it. So there is very little regulation other than, the amount of pressure you're putting on yourselves to practice or play.
It's very true. I mean, and you might enjoy something like jazz or rock or something that is not as structured. Probably, if you got involved in a different type of a music that was more structured, you may actually feel that. I think most of us have this finite capacity, a limited capacity to deal with things that just aren't very pleasant. And as our culture pushes more and more and more things our way, it just pushes buttons and takes us above a theoretical limit that we have to be able to deal with these things. And it causes us to gain weight. It really does.
Well, and it seems like, despite the things that you might enjoy, these regulations are getting worse. Like the amount of them is
Mhm.
just steadily increasing. And that's,
Yeah.
especially scary if you feel like you have no control over that matter. You're like, oh, the things around me are just going up.
That's exactly right. The other thing is, it's not just a matter of being too aggressively regulated in our culture in every conceivable way. It's also just where people influence each other much more than they ever have in the past. If I get on Facebook and say, "Oh, here's what I did this last weekend," and a number of my friends may absolutely crucify what I did, and so that influences me. It has a massive effect on what I do and how I feel. So even my friends are involved in regulating me these days. And I think that's the case for a lot of us. It's not just laws, regulations, and overt regulations, but also the fact that every single part of our culture is now graded. We're ranked in terms of how well we do business, how good a person is, how good a general contractor, how good a pilot, or whatever. Everybody gets graded, and it puts a yet additional stresses on people that we never had even 10 years ago. We didn't do things like this.
Well, yeah, not only the things that you are doing, but the things you're not doing, where
Mhm.
people will now like, oh, are you not doing that? And you're like, I didn't know I had to be doing that. That's now an additional stressor too.
It is. It's all too much. The other kind of hallmark of a lot of this is the level of forcefulness. Our politics at a national level really no longer involve recommendations, suggestions, things like, for example, the recommended daily allowance of certain foods. It's not really regulatory. They're just suggestions. But that's not what our regulations are all about these days. 90% of the laws that we pass at this point have to do with either outright banning of something or of mandates, and that those are absolutely the same thing in two opposite directions. Either you cannot do this under any circumstances, or you must do this no matter what you think. And so a lot of that is just we're being forced into things that we really don't want to do, that aren't healthy for us. And those are some of the things also that are affecting the ways that we behave. They're pushing things. It's interesting. Even when you look at things, I mean, school shootings and horrible things that sometimes happen would seem to have nothing to do with obesity. They're two different things that are happening in the same culture. But what's interesting is when you look at the curve at the number of public shootings, of mass shootings in the United States, it follows the exact same signature. You would have no way to know that you're not looking at obesity because those two graphs look identical. Isn't that interesting?
That is fascinating, actually. And, it kind of makes me think like, as horrifying as these things are, we don't want to be told we have to do something, and we don't want to be told we can't do something,
Mhm.
and we don't want to see, horrors and atrocities on every corner. How do we push back? Like, how do we kind of manage that situation on our own?
I think it's up to each of us to decide for ourselves what our theoretical limits are, and to respect those limits. To just say, I theoretically could do certain things, but I choose not to because it would push me over an edge and further deplete my spirit, and would cause me to not treat other people as well. I'd always be stressed out, and I would likely start gaining weight. To make those connections and to just say I'm choosing not to do certain things precisely because I will gain weight if I do those things.
Yeah. So, in looking at those limits, are some people just handling it better than others? Is there like an internal threshold that just says, X person has 30 points worth of resource in their body and their mind, and someone else has 50? Like, are we just naturally offset from each other?
We are to a certain extent, but I think also most of us have differing thresholds. So, I mean, you could visit with a person now and then visit with them a month from now, and their ability to tolerate certain things would likely be different depending on external phenomena, things that they're going through in their own lives. And I think that when people are generally content, and when we have to do certain things that aren't very pleasant, but it's a kind of an exception to the rule, it's not the rule, it's different. But when a person every single day is doing something they don't really enjoy, or they're doing something in a way they don't enjoy it, or they're interacting with people who are overly forceful and regulatory of their behaviors, it's downhill from there. It really is.
Certainly. I was trying to think of, a lot of people I think look at younger, thinner people and they say, like, oh, well, that's your metabolism and it'll catch up with you. And I'm just wondering, like, maybe they just haven't hit a threshold yet. Maybe that's why we don't see so many, people who are older who have more responsibility, coping as well.
It's interesting because food is not everybody's thing. For those of us who really do enjoy food, that food intake tends to increase when we have a lot of various stresses going on. And it's not about stress eating because that's been well described in our culture. There's a tremendous number of books written about stress eating. But what's interesting is we live in a culture where 70%, 70% of Americans are overweight. And that's not an individual problem. This is almost, if stress eating is when a person has certain triggers that they go through those triggers and they eat more, that's stress eating. But we're talking about an entire culture. If stress eating is one person walking down a sidewalk, then really what's happening with us is everybody in the United States is going up the same up escalator, continuing to gain weight. And now we're using medicines that help us. I mean, we're literally requiring medicines in order to survive in our culture without gaining weight. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it certainly is. And that's one of those things I wanted to talk to you about is what you think of this new, medicated route to manage obesity. Because Ozempic and I'm sure to some extent others like it have been kind of touted as like, this is the fix. This is what we're going to do.
It's interesting because a solution really is different for everybody. A solution is different when you are Eli Lilly from what it is if you are a person who wants to lose weight. And I think for Eli Lilly, what a dream come true. I mean, basically what's happened is they've created medicines and Nordisk as well. I mean, there are a number of companies that are doing this. They have a wonderful product. They're great for diabetes. They do a great job of controlling blood sugars. They're really helping to save lives. But when you use this with expressed intent to lose weight, it's just a lost opportunity precisely because people are not taking care of the things that they should be taking care of. So we theoretically will all just be angry, frustrated, not understand why, but no longer gaining weight because we're on medicines. It just doesn't, it doesn't, it's a lost opportunity to handle this in a way that's healthier. And it's just, to me, it's just craziness to require a medicine in order to survive in this culture. It's weird.
Well, and to look at that, from this perspective as we're having this conversation, saying like, oh, well, you can take Ozempic or whichever else, and you can lose weight. And there's your solution. And people will say like, I'll finally be happy because I'll be thinner. It's like, except that there is a very high cost to this treatment. So now you're going to be stressing about money.
Mm-hmm.
There is the pressure to, look better, feel better, be happier, whatever, when you're thinner, as well as just like the stress of putting your body through something that it's otherwise doesn't necessarily need. Like you've added three things because you lost one.
That's really what it is. I mean, to me, it's no different from saying I've decided not to put this basement fire in my house out because I have a fan and I'm directing the smoke away from my face, and I think we're good. So to me, it's a lost opportunity, and it's absolutely the wrong way to handle the problem. I mean, there are a lot of different reasons why people gain weight. But to be taking care of people who are super stressed out and have found that they eat less food when they take these types of medications, the GLP-1 agonists, such as Ozempic, Wegovy, and some of the others, it's just insanity. It really is. I would imagine in 20 or 30 years, when we look back on this, it'll be a head scratching era in our history to just kind of think, it was crazy. They were really doing this. They were taking medicines so that they wouldn't gain weight rather than dealing with the problems. It's crazy.
And we see those things, today. If you look backwards in time, you're like, wow, why did we do that? Like that very clearly was not a good idea. It might have worked, but with what kind of consequences? And now we're in those moments and you're like, what is the foresight of this situation? I
Mhm.
feel like we're about to go downhill very fast.
It just there are so many wonderful solutions, and I think that on the one hand, if somebody wants to take weight loss medications, if that's the direction that they want to head, it's my belief that as a physician, I just advise people of options. I really don't make those decisions for the people. I rather am just an educator and kind of a teammate on a decision making team along with the patient. So I think if a person wants to use medications, if that's really what they want to do, then I support them in that decision. But I think that there's so many wonderful ways to be able to address this problem in ways that we don't tend to look at it, that when we do, it just becomes a completely redefined problem that is way easier for us to fix.
And with a topic as popular as this one, weight loss is on everybody's mind, especially at the start of the year. Anytime within probably January to March, like everybody's talking about how they're going to lose weight. Why is it that we're not hearing this discussion you and I are having? Like, is this topic just because it's new and you've kind of founded the foundation of it, for lack of a better term, or is it that there is so much money to be made on the other side?
I think that there's a tremendous amount of money to be made in this. And then there's also the prestige of being able to address this problem. I mean, the drug manufacturers have given patients a great option with which to be able to lose weight. And I applaud them for that. I think the technology is fantastic, but I just think that there are better ways to address the problem at a more proximate level. And it's fun for me to be able to show people that you can make certain changes in your life, and then you can almost ride a wave. You don't have to create the energy in the wave in order to surf. You just have to be able to position yourself so you can literally ride your own life to weight loss by doing things that cause us to gain weight rather than commandeer. I mean, the whole issue is that it just seems like we would be able to influence our own behaviors, but you really can't. It's very difficult for people to just decide, I'm going to breathe more slowly right now. I'm going to try to really slow my respiratory rate down, for example. And when I do that, the second I start thinking about something else, my respiratory rate will just go right back to where it was before. And that's exactly what happens with weight loss in a life that creates more stress than we're able to handle. And we just try to push through thinking that we should be able to handle this, and we can't.
You're caught in a vicious cycle, and until you get out of the whirlpool, like you're just going to keep being sucked down no matter how far out of it you swim.
It's really what it is. And I think that we're so engrossed in what we theoretically should be able to do that nobody seems to pay attention to the fact that, hey, wait a minute, no one seems to be able to do this.
Yeah, I think it's because, again, it's that outside influence. If you look online, you will inevitably see people who are incredibly fit or, very good looking for one reason or another. And you just think, well, if they got there, I have to be able to get there. Our circumstances don't matter. My body can do what theirs is doing, regardless of our situation.
No, and really, Colton, you just touched on the primary issue. It is circumstances. I talk to my patients about that a lot. Weight loss is not a matter of calories in and calories out. It's a matter of life circumstances, the circumstances under which you're living your life, what you're expecting, and how realistic it is, how close to being completely depleted as a human being you are in our culture.
So, what is our route moving forward? Like, what does the future look like from here, into the next decade if we don't make changes or if we do?
I think that there are just so many changes that are occurring at this point. The changes in our culture are now starting to accelerate to an even greater extent. Nobody's really sure exactly how artificial intelligence is going to affect us. We have a lot of international stresses going on with countries that theoretically have access to nuclear devices that are angry with each other. It's really scary right now. We have a lot of different things that are going on around our world and also within our culture. And so my prediction would be that obesity rates will actually increase, both overweight rates, which sit at about 70%, and obesity rates, which are just over 40%, likely will be increasing during the next decade. It'll be interesting because if the GLP-1 agonists become ubiquitous, that most people start using them, most people who would benefit from them are on them. If that theoretically did occur, I think you might notice obesity rates go down. But But I think the insurance companies are already starting to push back vigorously on that. It's very expensive to give somebody a $1,000 per month medication when they don't have obesity, the primary reason for which the medication is prescribed. And so it's just kind of insane. I mean, especially because there are just so many better ways to handle things like this so that we don't have to take medications.
And there's a hard balance in there too, as well, when you're talking about, the mindset. What we're seeing every day is, how much is it helping you to see it versus how much do you need to know? And it seems like a very fine line to ride because you're like, I want to know what's happening in the world. But when it's being thrown at me 24 hours a day, I feel very stressed. All of a sudden, I wasn't thinking about, the foreign country or the new software that, is going to take out so many sectors. Like, I'm not thinking about that until it's, vigorously addressed repeatedly. And now I'm like, well, now it's all I'm thinking about.
It's true. Although what I've done is I actually limit my exposure to a lot of stories that probably aren't necessary for me to know. I mean, I could theoretically know a tremendous number of things going on in our world, but my attention span for news is really targeted more toward major issues the United States is dealing with right now, because they can come back to affect all of us, and those are things that we all need to know about. But as far as the for lack of better terms, specialty news, learning about violent crimes that are being done in cities that don't involve you, things like that are a little bit. I tend to shy away from that. It has an effect on us, and I purposely limit my exposure to it because the price I pay to know those things is far higher than the benefit that I get for knowing those things.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to your talk about regulations. It's where you're
Mhm.
like, well, I do enjoy this thing I want to do, but the amount of regulations is so high, it's prohibitive. Like it would be worse for me to do this than it would for me to not do it. In the same
Yeah.
way that like consuming this media is very good for you to know some things, but if you consume all of the things, it's now suddenly very bad.
It is, and I think that a lot of us make the conscious decision to just say, I'm okay. I can still be a responsible American without knowing every single solitary thing our country is involved in. I tend to stay abreast of issues in healthcare and various other things in the industries that I'm involved in, but I just don't pay attention to a lot of other things. My knowing those things doesn't help, and it's outside of my scope of practice. And I find that when I try to pay too much attention to things, it doesn't give me a benefit.
Do you think we'll see things like that reduce? I mean, right now we have what we always refer to as the 24-hour news cycle,
Mm-hmm.
and we have channels, a multitude of them that are dedicated entirely to news at all hours of the day, regardless. As we start to realize how bad that is for us and we start to make these healthier changes, do you think, because those companies are sliding downhill currently, do you think those will reduce and they will just become part of some other network and it'll go back to like, oh yeah, here's the 1 hour a day where you hear about news?
I don't know. I think that people are really involved in the news, and I think it's the FOMO, fear of missing out, and I think that there are a lot of things in our culture that work that way, that we're kind of sucked into certain things that probably don't benefit us very much. So I don't know what'll happen. I think that in the end, I think that there's an audience that wants to hear the news, and really enjoys the 24-hour streaming. I think that that likely will continue. I don't see any reason why it wouldn't.
It's just one of those interesting things to think about where I'm like, if we all had a realization that, hey, this is bad for you, how much would our society change in 1 year, in 10 years? Like, how quickly would things happen?
I don't know. I think that my approach, my book is really about, and my approach with patients is really about what each of us can do as individuals. And I think the way that things like this spread through a culture is that our friends start to see, hey, you're losing weight. This is really cool. What are you doing? And a person will share the way that they're doing it, and it's something that that person's probably never heard of before. It's not something that's intuitive. It's not something that we tend to do. And so I think that that's the way it spreads. And or to just realize that a person is really content. They're just happy in their own skin. And and people want to know why. You know what, you're doing well. What's going on with you? And I want to feel more the way that you seem to feel. And it's great. It really is.
Absolutely. And on that note, like, please, let's make sure that people know where to find your book and more from you if they're looking for more.
Well, the book is not out yet. It'll be out here probably in about 2.5 months. But my website is super easy to remember, and it's just my first name, Chet, Chet, and then MD for medical doctor. So chetmd.com is my website. And the website is largely under construction at this point, and we have a blog that we're putting together. And I'm educating people about exactly how we can do these things. The other really cool part about this, Colton, is that this is not just an obesity application. This is also kind of a way that each of us can make our lives better and not be so stressed out. Still exist in a wonderful culture, but to not be so influenced by a lot of the craziness that goes on in our culture, to limit our exposure to things that we do have the ability to limit those exposures.
Certainly. Well, I will put that website in the show notes for anyone that is looking at it, despite the fact it's very easy to remember with only 6 letters. It's a very good website. I hope all the best for the book. I hope people will go to the website. They'll kind of follow up to say like, hey, keep an eye on this. When this book comes out, it's something you're going to want to have on your shelf. Otherwise, I've appreciated your time immensely. This has been a great conversation, and it's been a lot of fun.
I've really enjoyed myself too. I appreciate your time, and also appreciate the time of your audience. And I hope that we've talked about some things that hopefully will resonate with some people who are having a difficult time dealing with the things that they're dealing with in their own lives.
Yeah, I certainly hope so.
Well, thank you again.
I'm not a doctor, nor do I play one in a radio show, but I would still advise working out and a semi-decent diet alongside the life changes we've discussed today. Both are good for your long-term mental and physical health, aside from just the weight loss. The top country rankings are exactly the same as last week, so no update needed. I'll drop it into the show notes if anyone cares to look. Otherwise, that's it for this month. Have a great week, a great weekend. I will see you all back here next week for another new episode. Until that next episode, you know all the things. Please do the things that help the show. Remember, you can reach out to dumbenoughpodcast@gmail.com or on any of the social media pages if you want to reach me personally. But most importantly, stay dumb.